right, guys. Welcome to the culminating Food for Thought lecture series for calendar year 2020. This lecture series has been a valued community tradition of Trinity Universities for more than 30 years. This evening's Food for Thought lecture is brought to you by Trinity University Alumni Relations and Development Division and the Office of Special Events as part of Trinity's commitment to lifelong learning. My name is Ethan Jones from the class of 2021. I'm studying music, entertainment business, and human communication at Trinity University. I'm from Fort Worth, Texas, and I'm fortunate to have found my passion at Trinity in the handbell choir. I've been ringing bells now for more than 4 years, and I know that Trinity students love the tower bells on campus. We are all looking forward to learning more about the history of how the bells are related, and I'm honored to be here this evening to moderate this Food for Thought lecture. And it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Diane Persellin. Dr. Persellin has been a professor of music education at Trinity University for 38 years. She teaches courses in music teacher preparation, conducts the Trinity Handbell Ensemble, and is a recipient of the Z.T. Scott Faculty Fellowship, Trinity's highest award for teaching and advising. She has served on the board of directors for the San Antonio Symphony, as president of Texas Music Educators Conference, and editor of General Music Today. An author of over 100 publications, Dr. Perssellin's most recent book is titled A Concise Guide to Teaching with Desirable Difficulties. Under her directorship, the Trinity Handbell Ensemble in 2019 performed at Carnegie Hall, Radio City Music Hall, and at the Holiday Pops with the San Antonio Symphony. Professor Persellin will share some history of enormous bells, including Trinity's own Murchison Tower bells, as well as much smaller handbells from across the globe. Following her talk, we will hear 4 musical pieces from the Trinity Handbell Ensemble students as they perform festive holiday music. The performance is moderated by Trinity graduate Taylor Mobley, class of 2016. At the end of the performance, we will host a Q&A session. You will be able to submit your questions at any time during this presentation or concert by using the Q&A tab. The questions will be summarized, and I will submit as many as I can to Dr. Persellin. Thank you, guys, and now, welcome Dr. Persellin.
Thank you, Ethan, for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Alumni Relations, for hosting this talk. Welcome, everyone, Trinity alumni, friends of Trinity. I wish I could see you all. I'm just delighted to be with you today. And I'm so glad we opened with the sound of Trinity's tower bells. I love to hear the sound of the tower bells as I walk across the Trinity campus. Tower bells have such a great history. I'm also fascinated by old bells that I've encountered in travels with my husband, Bob. In fact, Bob bought this 300-year-old Buddhist bell in Korea. He's assured me that he bought it and he didn't steal it, but I think it's amazing. For the past 38 years, as Ethan mentioned, I've had the honor of conducting the Trinity Handbell Ensemble. So ancient bells, tower bells, handbells, how are all these bells related? Well, today I want to give you an overview of how handbells have evolved from ancient bells and bells in the belfry. Let me share my screen so you can see some of my slides. I have so many wonderful stories, but I want to present today just an overview of the rich history of bells. It's also known as campanology. Well, our story begins 200 years BC with the terracotta warriors in Xi'an, China. Emperor Qin, the first emperor of China, created these clay warriors to protect him in the afterlife. Buried with Emperor Qin were these 8,000 terracotta soldiers, each with a unique face. 130 chariots with 520 horses, and of course his weapons. His burial site was discovered in 1974, but alas and alack, no bells were discovered buried with the emperor. However, 233 years before Emperor Qin, Marquis Yi of the state of Zheng, China, was laid to rest in his 4-room tomb, along with his most prized possessions. These included the usual bronze weapons, but most famously, his tomb included an enormous set of these 64 bronze bells. And aren't they amazing? These were arranged into a single musical instrument that likely required 5 people to play. These bells were discovered in 1978, and they are now known as the 8th wonder of the ancient world. They can be seen in China's Hubei Provincial Museum. These bells are very fragile, and they've only been played a few times in modern history. Most recently, earlier this year, in an international virtual concert to mark the end of the worst of the COVID-19 virus in China. We hope they can ring again soon when the virus is gone all over the world. This Chinese bell is 2,500 years old and is one of the oldest of its type in existence. We do have fragments of earlier pottery bells, but this bell is one of the first metal bells to survive. It's made of bell bronze, which is about 77% copper, 23% tin. This mixture gives the very best sound, and the Chinese knew this even very early on. Well, fascinating bells can be found throughout Asia and Asian history. Here we have Korean Confucian bells on the left, hit with a stick. We have a large Japanese bell, hit with a club. And then we have this beautiful Indian bell here. It's an Indian Buddhist bell here on the right. And there's a rope around the clapper, so it's controlled that way. Bells are also part of the fabric of early Judeo-Christianity. The book of Exodus in the Bible notes that small bells and pomegranates, of all things, were worn as ornaments on the hem of the robe of the high priest in Jerusalem. And you can see at the bottom of his hem, those are bells and pomegranates. Well, more Christian bell history. In 400 AD, as the story goes, Paulinus of Nola in Campania, Italy, discovered that a large brass kettle made a resounding din, and it was heard for quite some distance. Well, Paulinus hung it above the church and had it struck with a hammer to announce an assembly. Paulinus is often credited with introducing large overhead kettlebells, as well as small handheld bells or handbells, to early Christian worship services. Here we see him holding what looks more like a bell than a brass kettle, but I think that's artistic license. 200 years later, Pope Sabinian officially sanctioned using bells in the church. By the 11th century, tower bells were commonplace across Europe. Italy, of course, is famous for its bell towers. This is a picture of the famous Florence Cathedral, or Duomo, built by architect Arnolfo di Cambio. The bell tower, or campanile, was built by Giotto. The bell tower here has 7 levels, one for each bell. It has 7 bells. All children in Florence know the names of all 7 bells. Italian towers built for bells must have a minimum of 4 bells, and Trinity's architect O'Neill Ford admired Italian bell towers, and that's one of the reasons we have a wonderful bell tower at Trinity with our 4 bells. Russia also has a rich history of bell ringing. These are pictures of monks from the Russian Orthodox Church ringing huge tower bells with ropes tied around the clappers. I can only imagine how loud it is inside those bells. So what's the world's largest bell? Well, the Great Bell of Damazetti at 330 tons, cast in 1484 in Myanmar, was originally the biggest bell in the universe. However, tragedy struck. In 1608, elephants loaded the gigantic bell onto a barge in a river in Burma, and the barge sank, the elephant sank, and the bell sank too, and the bell has never been found. Many deep sea divers have tried to find the bell, but without luck. So now the Tsar bell at only 216 tons is the largest surviving bell in the world. This is an artist's rendering of moving the Tsar bell to the Ivan the Great bell tower in the Kremlin. This is a modern picture of that same bell, but as you see, it's got a problem. It's never rung. It was badly damaged by fire in 1737. For a time, the bell served as a type of chapel, and the hole caused by that fire, the broken area, formed the door to the little chapel. It stands near the Kremlin's Ivan the Great bell tower, and the Ivan the Great bell tower contains 22 bells, but all much smaller than the Tsar bell. Well, on to France in our world tour. This is the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris before the fire. The two bell towers hold a total of 10 bells, but only the largest bell of the original 10 bells survived the French Revolution. The other original 9 bells were melted down into cannonballs. They were replaced after the French Revolution, but they kind of, cheaped out. They were never in tune. So in 2013, Notre Dame got 9 new bells. And the picture on the right is the exhibition of the new bells before they got hoisted into the 2 bell towers. Mercifully, all 10 bells were spared in the recent fire in Notre Dame. And of course, the tower bells in the book and film, Hunchback of Notre Dame, are very famous. This is Charles Laughton, who starred as Quasimodo, the bell ringer, who pulled the ropes to ring the bells in the 1939 version of the film. And of course, that's the best version. On a much more sober note, throughout history during wars, church bells have been confiscated from conquered towns and turned into tools of war. Napoleon confiscated many bells and melted them down and turned them into guns and ammunition and cannons and cannonballs. This was also seen as a strong message that the town had been silenced. This picture of a bell graveyard was taken after World War II. Of the 175,000 bells stolen, only about 25,000 bells were recovered and returned to the churches. On to England. Big Ben is the nickname for both the Great Bell and the tower in the Palace of Westminster in London. Currently, Big Ben the bell has been silenced until 2021 for repairs to the tower. At 13.5 tons and 7 feet 2 inches, the deafening bell is twice the weight of an African elephant and 7 feet 2 inches. And it's about as tall as a former basketball star Yao Ming. It's also incredibly loud. The London Daily Telegraph stated about the repairs, silencing Big Ben was like stopping the heartbeat of our democracy. I'll always remember the first time I heard the tower bells of Westminster Abbey in London. This is a clip of a carillon ringing in 2011 at the royal wedding of Kate and William. And no, I wasn't invited to the wedding, but I want you to watch how the bells turn around over and over again. They're all attached to wheels. Well, Zoom doesn't quite do it justice. So when we can all travel again, you really do need to go to hear the Westminster bells, maybe for another royal wedding. Well, before tower bells like those in Westminster Abbey were mechanized to ring, bells rang via human muscle power. This is a very early wood block cut, showing tower bell ringers pulling ropes to ring bells. Bells were secured onto wheels to give the pullers more control. These men are also pulling ropes to ring tower bells in the belfry. They initially were pulling a sequence of bells called change ringing. Change ringing is performed by teams of ringers playing long mathematical sequences of permutations on a set of bells, with each ringer assigned a number. But the ringers also rang tunes of church hymns. Originally, only men rang the tower bells, but in 1896, Miss Alice White of Basingstoke, England, became the first female bell ringer. Once women began to ring the bells, there was no stopping them. While some tower bells still require human rope pullers, other tower bells became connected to a type of keyboard, a keyboard with large pegs played with one's fist. This is an old tower keyboard, bell tower keyboard in Amersfoort, Netherlands. And notice the pegs here correspond to the white keys of a piano or a keyboard. These pegs here correspond to the black keys, and then we have pedals too. So it's a very interesting keyboard. I have a short video of a very strong woman, Glenda Watts, ringing tower bells from a belfry in Sydney, Australia, hitting pegs with her fists. When I grow up, I want to be as strong as Glenda Watts and ring bells like that. She is pretty amazing. So Asian, European, Australian tower bells are inspiring and amazing and magnificent, but how are they related to handbells? Well, let's focus on those tower bell ringers again. Early tower bell ringers practicing during the week for Sunday morning became so noisy that the townspeople started to object. Their rehearsals and their mistakes were heard all over town, and the villagers got cranky. Can't you be quiet? So small bronze handbells were created so the ringers could practice and make their mistakes more quietly before they actually pulled the ropes on the big bells on Sundays. Rehearsals were initially held in the cold, unheated churches, but eventually the ringers wised up and started to meet in the only heated building in the village, the local tavern. Soon these practice bells, the handbells, became an entity unto themselves, and festivals and competitions between handbell teams began to spring up. Handbell ringing became popular entertainment in England in the late 1800s. This ensemble, very dignified ensemble, is rehearsing to perform for the Queen in 1881. The United Hand Ringers. Don't you love that name? You need to know that tower bell and handbell ringing became known as an activity for the aristocracy and admired for its physical exercise and intellectual challenges. And these guys are ready to go. They have a lot of bells. Gradually, rehearsals in the nice, warm tavern enjoyed with a pint became, shall we say, quite enthusiastic. And the parish clergy sometimes had to take back control of the bell ringing responsibilities. But on to focusing on bells in the United States across the pond. Our ancestors from across the globe valued bells, and they wanted to enjoy them in America too. The Liberty Bell is our most famous bell. It was cast in 1751. The last big crack happened on Washington's birthday in 1846, and then stopped ringing because of that major crack. Today, it resides in Philadelphia, where it is occasionally gently tapped to mark special occasions, but certainly not rung. But back to bell ringers. On a trip to England, Barnum and Bailey of Barnum and Bailey circus fame, yes, they saw a group of English handbell ringers and they found them to be quite entertaining. They thought they could market them back in the States to make some money. They subsequently gave a group of British handbell ringers Swiss costumes and Swiss mustaches. They told the Brits not to speak lest they be discovered to be British, and they marketed them as the Swiss family bell ringers in circuses across the country. I heard they were very popular. Eventually, the first handbell ensembles, however, were introduced in the States, and in 1920s, they were introduced as an art form outside of the circus. Popularity of handbell ensembles spread throughout the world. Today, we have over 100,000 handbell musicians in the world. In churches, civic organizations, schools, universities, and in San Antonio. Let's go to San Antonio. We do have some famous bells in San Antonio. In fact, San Antonio has even been called the City of Bells. These are the 5 lovely bells at the Arneson River Theater, which commemorates the 5 San Antonio missions. Bells played an important part, or a very important role at our missions. This is the beautiful Mission San Francisco de Espada near the Espada Aqueduct. This is my beautiful mother on a recent visit to the San Antonio missions. And yes, she has her mask in hand. Our most famous mission, of course, is the Alamo. Did you know that the Alamo originally had twin towers that housed 4 large bells? One bell is housed in the Alamo today. And Sam Maverick, signer of the Texas Declaration of Independence, found a cannon on his property near the Alamo grounds. In 1874, his family had that cannon, an instrument of death, melted down and recast into a bell, an instrument of peace. That bell now proudly hangs in the historic St. Mark's Episcopal Church downtown. We have other famous bells in San Antonio. Our only true carillon in San Antonio is housed in Central Christian Church. A bell carillon must contain at least 23 bells, and this carillon has 48 bells. The largest bell weighs 3,850 pounds, or, as I'm told, the combined weight of 2 fully grown Texas Longhorns. George Gregory, the church organist and carillonneur, has given Trinity Handbell ringers demonstrations in the belfry, which we've loved. And even closer to home, this is a clipping from the Express News in 1964 featuring 2 of the 4 Carroll and Calvert bells, fresh from the foundry in England, about to be hoisted up to the top of the Murchison Tower at Trinity University. Professor Emeritus Doug Brackenridge, our Trinity historian, helped locate this clipping for us. The largest bell of the 4 is 1,000 pounds. Dr. William Thornton, music department chair in the 60s and 70s, composed the tune that is played by the 4 bells that you heard in the introduction. Our tower bells are controlled by mechanical action and not, as rumor has it, by energetic student tower bell ringers who ring bells around the clock. Be a good idea, though. This is a picture of the first handbell choir at Trinity with the first director, Claude Zetti, who was the choral director at that time. Trinity student Cliff Whittle spoke to chaplain Reverend Raymond Judd about the possibility of having handbells in the chapel, as it had been an important part of music in his home church. Reverend Judd was enthusiastic about the idea. Subsequently, the Whittle family purchased the core set of handbells in 1978. These are a few of the handbells that you'll see tonight in the concert. The bells to the left are the Schulmerich bells, bronze bells with plastic handles, no longer leather. These are chimes or choir chimes. They're aluminum tubes. And this is one of our 7 aluminum bells that are humbo jumbo, about 17, 18, 19 pounds. And we order them out of aluminum now rather than bronze so we can lift them. Here you see some of our bells in this picture. We're warming up just before the musicians of the San Antonio Symphony entered the stage at the Tobin for the dress rehearsal of the San Antonio Holiday Pops. What a privilege to perform 6 times with the San Antonio Symphony. It was such an honor to perform last year over the Thanksgiving weekend at Radio City Music Hall. It's featured over here on the left. Here we are, our grinning faces after we opened for the Rockettes. And then 2 days later, we performed in Carnegie Hall, which was such a thrill. That was an amazing weekend. We're grateful to Trinity University and to the Dixon Allen Foundation for their support and making that all possible. Well, folks, you have now time traveled through thousands of years of bell history. The Trinity Handbell Ensemble now wants to bring you some holiday cheer, and we could all use some holiday cheer. We will perform these 4 pieces from our virtual holiday concert. To introduce each piece, we welcome Taylor Mobley, a recent Trinity grad who majored in communication and minored in theater. You may recognize Taylor as the producer of a local morning TV show and a former host of the Trinity Christmas concert. These are the amazing students who videotaped this concert in the Trinity Chapel a month ago before heading home for the semester for Thanksgiving. They finished classes online only yesterday, so they may be sleeping right now. We are so grateful to be able to rehearse this past semester during these unprecedented times and to perform virtually. COVID restrictions kept us socially distanced. When rehearsing on the Lowry Auditorium stage, we had a big stage. We couldn't share bells or music. We used a lot of disinfectant, but we really enjoyed the challenge. So enjoy this short concert, and I will see you on the other side. And I'm going to thank you very much and turn it over to Taylor Mobley. It's all yours.
Hello, Trinity friends and alumni. On behalf of the Trinity Handbell Ensemble, I want to welcome you to our virtual holiday handbell concert. We filmed this concert in the Parker Chapel here at Trinity University just before the students headed home for Thanksgiving. My name is Taylor Mobley. I'm from the class of 2016, and I will be your host. In March of the Three Kings, also known as Farandole, the first part of the piece is based on an old French Christmas carol. It tells the story of 3 kings regally visiting baby Jesus. French composer Georges Bizet then paired this stately march with a traditional French community dance called a farandole, in which villagers dance through an exciting town. This farandole dance is heard in the second part of this piece. Freddie Kirk joins us on percussion. Riu Chiu is a 15th century Spanish Christmas carol. The text of the verses of the carol can tell a story of the birth of baby Jesus. The text of the choruses is comprised of the nonsense syllables Riu, Riu, Chiu, and represents the song of a nightingale. Savannah Walgren joins us on the flute. Carol of the Bells is a popular Christmas carol written by Ukrainian composer Mykola Leontovich in 1914, and lyrics by Peter J. Wachowski. This exciting arrangement features university organist Dr. David Heller. Carol of the Bells. Thank you so much for joining us, Trinity alumni and friends. It has been my absolute pleasure to introduce this music to you in this virtual concert. Special thanks to the Trinity Chapel for hosting us, and to Sean Zachariah in the Alumni Relations Office for the lovely and beautiful poinsettias. For our last piece, we will perform the holiday favorite, Sleigh Ride. The lyrics focus on favorite winter activities such as riding in a horse-drawn sleigh through the snow, though that's something most of us South Texans don't often experience. We wish you and your family a safe and healthy holiday season. Feliz Navidad, happy holidays, and Merry Christmas.
All right, guys. Thank you so much again for listening to our performance. I know I had an absolute blast performing with this ensemble under Dr. Persellin, and we hope that this concert has put you guys in some holiday spirit. So now it's time for us to jump right into some questions. So if you haven't done so already, please submit your questions using the Q&A tab. And I will now read out some questions that Dr. Persellin can answer accordingly. So first, Dr. Persellin, one question is, what is the average lifespan of these bells and their cost?
Average lifespan of which bells?
It just says of the bells in general, so you can talk about whichever ones you want.
Bells in general, it's hard to say. Those Chinese bells that were discovered, and they're 2,300 years old, they are very fragile. So they've only been played 3 times in the past 50 years. So they will crumble and break. So they're very fragile. But normally, if they're cast a little bit better now, we have better means of making bells, they'll last a long time, providing they were cast well to begin with. As I mentioned, those bells in Notre Dame weren't ever cast well, and they were a little out of tune. And that poor Notre Dame Cathedral was known for the out of tune bells. So I guess a rich benefactor finally said, let's deal with this. And so they got some new bells. But I think handbells will last a long time if they're taken care of. We go through some plastic handles. We get enthusiastic when we play, so sometimes we break a few handles, but
it's true.
yes, but not so much that the bronze casting. They're pretty sturdy.
Yeah. Our next question is from Kelly Brown, and she says, when discussing the European bells being confiscated during the war and roughly 25,000 returned, how did they know to which churches to return them all?
Sometimes they didn't. They just, sometimes they were inscribed, so the bells had markings on them. And sometimes the church would remember these 4 bells were ours, but oftentimes they couldn't match them up, and that's why the bell graveyard. And sometimes they just went, they never were matched up. It's a tragedy. And this happened pretty consistently after many of the wars. Starting, well, even before Napoleon, it was kind of, this is what they needed, more ammunition, so they grabbed the church bells. Typically, there was kind of a gentleman's agreement at that point. They would try to leave one bell hanging and then steal the rest of them. So that wasn't always the case, but oftentimes it was.
Yeah. Our next question is from Kimberly Montford, and she says, how did you, Dr. Persellin, get involved in handbells?
Well, I got involved in handbells when I was a graduate student at Arizona State, and I was directing children's church choir, vocal choirs, and they needed a handbell director. And I said, I would love to do that. That sounds like a lot of fun. What's a handbell? So I didn't even know what it was, but I was a poor graduate student. So I signed up, and I found right away it was just amazing. And as luck would have it, my organ teacher, when I was a little girl, my organ teacher had become a handbell expert, and she was directing handbells. So she gave me some workshops and told me how to do that. And then I attended workshops. And interestingly, when I was auditioning, interviewing at Trinity, they happened to have a handbell choir here. And I thought, oh my goodness, it's meant to be. So I've been directing handbells ever since I joined Trinity.
Yes, and we're so glad you have been. Our next question is, how many bells is each person in the handbell choir responsible for?
That's an interesting question. So the middle portion of the ensemble, they usually have 3 or 4. So they'll have 2 white keys of the keyboard, as it were, and then maybe 1 or 2 of the black keys of the keyboard. But as you noticed, the students playing the really high little bells, they can hold 2 bells in each hand. So they have more bells. So they might have 6, 8, or 10. And then the bass bells will have a lot more too, because their bells don't play quite as often. So they might have 6, 8, 2. And if they're malleting, I kind of load them up, and sometimes they can do 14 or 16 bells even. So it can kind of vary. Ethan, how many bells do you usually play, and what's the most you've played?
I usually play, I do the little bells. I don't know if you could see, I had 2 in each hand at one point. And so I have 8 or 10 little bells at the same time that I'm switching in between. And usually when we're not socially distanced, we're all sharing one long table. So we're reaching around to each other and grabbing each other's bells. And it can be very dramatic at times, but that's what makes it really fun.
Yeah, and that was different this time too, because Ethan said, I have 3 bells on one beat. I can't all 3 or maybe 6 bells at one time. What can I do? And I said, I can't help you. We can't share bells this semester. We can't have somebody else come over and grab them. So that's been very different. But
well, that's why
I figured out how to do it.
Usually it's like a team sport. We have to sometimes like pick up each other's bells if somebody has a lot going on and stuff. That's what makes it fun. Our next question is asking if you have any interesting stories about how the Trinity bells specifically were acquired, or if you know how they were acquired.
Yes, I have a couple of stories. So we had 4 octaves of handbells when I arrived at Trinity, and this was my first year as an assistant professor. And I was so grateful to have a job. And 2 of my ringers, who were first-year students, said, "We want more bells. Back home, we had 5 octaves. Why do we only have 4 octaves?" And so they went to Reverend Judd, and somehow he found donors to make that happen. And so we then had 5 octaves, so we could play much more challenging music, bigger music. So that was really nice too. And then we were going off to festivals, and the other college handbell ensembles had those big, huge aluminum bells, and we didn't have those. We didn't have access to those, and we couldn't play music that required those. But the Dixon Allen Foundation was able to help us with that. So that was really a blessing that we were able to acquire some of those big bells. And now the ringers have bigger muscles too because of those big bells.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have another question that says, can you talk about the tone or quality of clay bells versus metal bells?
Oh, clay bells aren't going to be pretty at all. They just don't resonate. If you've ever hit a clay pot, it's not a very pretty sound. So I think that the clay bells early on in China that we find in the tombs, those are potsherds, and those were not great bells. So they don't ring very long. They don't resonate. So we really need to have them be metal bells. And so once we learn how to make metal bells out of the bronze and the tin, then the bells became much more beautiful.
Yeah.
The tone was much better, and it could sustain.
Yeah, for sure. Diane Graves is asking, where do you find arrangements for the pieces the TU Handbell Choir plays? And do you or students ever create the arrangements?
Well, where I find arrangements is that I'm on YouTube all the time, watching what other handbell ringers across the country are playing and ringing. And I have my favorite professional handbell ensembles and other college handbell ensembles. And then publishers send me music too. So that's fun. But we have quite a few student composers at Trinity, and I encourage them to write music for our handbell ensemble. We were working on one last spring before we were all sent home. So we hope that we can perform that this spring. It wasn't a holiday piece. So I imagine we do a student composed piece maybe almost once every year now. And they're really good pieces. The students love this. They love to perform them. And if possible, if the student has had some conducting, I like them to teach the group that piece too. And that's a real sense of accomplishment if they can teach and conduct and present their piece in concert.
Yeah. We have another question from Martha Dutchon, and I think she's going to ask her question with her mic on. Martha? I think Martha's here. Let me see. Martha, can you hear us? Is your mic working?
Yeah, it's working now. I didn't have a question, but I thought this was lovely.
Yeah, thank
and my
you so
daughter's
much.
a graduate of Trinity, and she has always talked about the bell choir and concert. So thank you very much. I didn't really have a question. Thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah. We have another question that says, can you talk a little bit more about getting the clarity and precision in the performance that we heard tonight with all the ringers?
So that was especially challenging this year with social distancing, because we're usually shoulder to shoulder practically, and we play, we're a tight knit group. And as Ethan said, we steal each other's bells, we borrow, so it's easier to be precise when you're that close. And we were quite a ways apart, and the treble bells really had a hard time hearing the bass bells play on the lower auditorium stage. So it was challenging, but it was a good exercise to watch the stick. I always like to have people watch the conductor, so it was a good exercise for that, but it was challenging. It's, as you can well imagine, a tiny little bell. I've got a little bell. The clapper doesn't have to move very far, so you can
Yeah.
to ring very far, but a little bigger bell, you have to have a little bigger motion because the clapper has to move a little further.
Yeah. You gotta have a little bit more muscle.
I didn't bring over a really big bell, but some of the bells that that Ryan was ringing, he really has to anticipate the beat. He has to get that bell in motion so the clapper is activated against the bell. So it initially it is tricky because he can't fall behind. So you want to have your good musicians being able to anticipate that. So it's an interesting question too.
Yeah, it takes a lot of practice. We have a question from Dr. D. Jones, and she says, were the students novice handbell ringers before, or did they bring those skills to Trinity?
It varies from year to year. Usually I would guess about a third to almost a half of our students have experience when they come to Trinity and they really want to keep playing. But the other half, sometimes 2/3, really love the sound of the bells, or they hear us the first time at the Christmas concert and say, I want to do that. Or they have really good rhythmic skills or keyboard skills, and they're attracted to the puzzle effect of putting it all together, or they're composers. It attracts a lot of composers, so they learn it. And the first week they're a little befuddled, but by the second week they're getting it. We have smart Trinity students.
That's true.
And they catch on, and everybody mentors everybody. If they're playing little bells, let me show you a few little tricks. They're playing bells, let me show you some tricks. And so it works really surprisingly well.
Yeah, it's a very close-knit ensemble. You're right. It's fun to give your advice to other people.
You didn't have any handbell experience before college, did you?
No, I joined my second semester at Trinity. I didn't even know what handbells were like when I came to Trinity, and a lot of people in the music department said, oh, you should join the handbell ensemble with Dr. Persellin. It's lots of fun, and I never looked back. Another question is, have you ever been on a bell cruise? I've heard those are a thing.
Yes, there was a handbell cruise about my third year here, I guess back in 86, 87. And we were invited to be the demonstration handbell ensemble for a Caribbean cruise. And so we drove in Trinity vans over to Miami, and we got on the cruise, and there were several clinicians who taught us how to play handbells, but then we gave several demonstration concerts too. So that was an amazing experience. And we came back so prepared for the following year because we had played so much together. And we played in churches too on the way over to Miami, and in Miami on the way back too. So
yeah. It sounds like so much fun.
It was fun.
Another question from Jeanette Robbins. She asks, what do you think about bells performing music from other cultures? In Brazil, I enjoyed a group that performs music of Northeastern Brazil.
Oh, I would love to have more music from other cultures. That there just hasn't been a lot written for a college bell choir with 6, 7 octaves, but I'm sure on the lookout all the time. There are a few Japanese pieces that I'm looking at, but I would love to know more about that. We have some Latin American pieces in our repertoire, but they're usually arrangements of arrangements. But maybe my composers, my student composers could figure out a way to write some more pieces too.
Yeah.
Other cultures. It's a good idea.
We have time just for a couple more questions. David Weichman asks, where in the world are there still bell foundries? Regarding handbells, because of their small size, is it fairly easy to find someone to cast them? And then regarding large church bells, are they gone with the buggy whip and churches just broadcasting digital recordings?
There are bell foundries in England. I think most of them in the Netherlands I have dried up. And there's a bell foundry in Pennsylvania too, a couple of good ones. So, but the Trinity bells, they were founded or cast in England. So that's where we got our bells. So,
yeah.
It's a unique opportunity to have a bell foundry. For sure. Yeah, for sure. We have time for one last question, and this is something that has been asked by 4 or 5 different people. It's saying, how do we get the recording of this concert, and where is it going to be streamed? How can we get the access to the full recording of the concert, the sneak preview that was just played? Well, for the sneak preview, I think everyone would have access to this recording tonight who signed up for the webinar. And then there is a full concert tomorrow night at 6 o'clock when we're playing 7 pieces, these 4 pieces, but also 3 more. We didn't have time to play our whole concert tonight, but that's on Trinity Live. So that will be available to everyone tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. So we invite you to attend that too. And that will also be available on the Trinity website.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Persellin. This has been awesome. I'm going to wrap it up with a few closing remarks. I hope you guys enjoyed this very special evening's presentation and performance. For more information on future webinars and podcasts, please visit trinity.edu/alumni. And I want to remind you one last time that the full performance of Trinity's Handbell Ensemble Christmas Special premieres tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central Time at trinity.edu/live. Our next Food for Thought lecture is scheduled for January 14th at 5:30 p.m. Central Time. Physician and Trinity University alumnus Dr. Adam Brugman, class of 03, will explore the hidden costs of the opioid epidemic and solutions to fighting it. And again, thank you guys so much for joining us. And on behalf of all Trinity Tigers, happy holidays and good night.